There is something about our need to be somebody, a desire for greatness that is as old as humanity itself. If you think all the way back to the 3rd chapter of Genesis, the way that the serpent closed the deal with Adam and Eve was to tell them, when you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good from evil. You will be like God. And the brilliant Dutch theologian Henry Nouwen wrote that ever since then, we have been tempted to replace love with power. He says the long, painful history of the church is the power of people ever and again tempted to choose power over love, control over the cross, being a leader over being led. And this premise runs through the Bible, through human history, and through our very beings. So we shouldn't be too surprised or too judgmental with our friends James and John. Their boldness may not be our style, but the motivation behind their request to Jesus is certainly no stranger to us. Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. Shared glory, honored positions, proximity to powerful people. All of these are pretty popular means of getting to be somebody. If we can't be the one with power, if we can't be the big shot, if we can't be the honored guest, at least maybe we can sit close to them. Some of that glory might rub off on us. Some of that honor may spill over onto us. And we have to be careful, because religion is a particularly fertile soil in which the seeds of ambition grow, because it's far too easy to assume that relationship with God somehow translates into entitlement. Being close to God can be dangerous. Some of the most reprehensible acts in human history have been committed by people who claim to be sitting at the right or left hand of God. The brothers James and John apparently felt their closeness to Jesus gave them some kind of spiritual entree. In an attempt to become a better leader, I have read many books about leadership in my life. And what I've found as I think back on them is that most of those books are just kind of sophisticated methods for upward mobility in whatever organization that you are a part of. Most of the material about leadership that I read sounds more like James and John seeking prominence than like Jesus calling us to a life of servanthood and downward mobility. It has more to do with the pursuit of power than with the power of love. Because Jesus' response to James and John challenges our assumptions about greatness and power and prominence. He says to them, "Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And then the other disciples all get angry because, well, probably because James and John had the temerity to ask for positions that they all really wanted. But Jesus calmed them all down and said to each and every one of them sitting there, "Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you must be a slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is downward mobility. And that doesn't necessarily always connect with us, because the world's image of greatness is hierarchical. The greatest are at the top of the heap, and God is somehow maybe hovering over the heap. And the closer that you get to the top of the heap, then the closer you are to God. The more power you have, the closer you are to God. The closer you get to the top of the heap, the greater you are. Success and upward mobility and being served are signs of faithfulness to a hierarchical God. But Jesus leads us in another direction. He leads us in a direction that we can't even begin to expect. Again, Henry Nouwen said that the way of Christian leadership is not in the upward mobility that the world is so invested in, but in the way of downward mobility, ending on the cross. It is not a leadership of power and control, but a leadership of powerlessness and humility, in which the suffering servant of God, Jesus Christ, is made clear. Family, living our lives as a ransom for others involves making ourselves available to them. It is in offering others our whole self, our entire being. That means our hope and our despair. That means our doubts and our faith, our fear and our courage, our ambition and our humility. Say what you will about James and John, but at least they knew where true greatness was found. They may not have understood that they may not have understood what they were asking when they asked to be seated at Jesus' right and left hand. But they were asking the right person. They knew that Jesus was the one who would come into his glory. They just didn't understand the full implication of their request. And if you think about it, their request to be positioned near Christ reflects in some ways the ambivalence of the human spirit. On the one hand, there's the drive to be somebody, a drive that is often expressed in substituting power for love. And on the other hand, there is the lure of incarnate love, whose power is manifested in weakness. And following Jesus Christ toward downward mobility and giving oneself to others is authentic greatness. I want this church to be great. I want St. Paul's to be a great church. I want people to know that when there is pain and suffering in our community, St. Paul's will be there. I want people to know when there is happiness and rejoicing in our community, St. Paul's will be there. And when people in our community need to see Jesus, I want them to know that they will be able to see him in the St. Paul's family. But to be that kind of great, we need to understand what true greatness is. And we need to humble ourselves in the face of that greatness. But the most important thing that we need to do, and I believe this with every fiber of my being, the most important thing that we can do to become great as a family of God is that we need to really understand. I mean really, truly, viscerally understand that God's grace and mercy has been lavished upon us, upon each and every one of us. We need to understand that we are extravagantly loved by the King of creation, by the God of the universe. And we need to understand that the reason that we have been loved, the reason that we have been showered with grace and mercy is so that we can reflect that love and that grace and that mercy to people who aren't here yet. And if we can do that, if we can simply be a reflection of the love and grace and mercy that we have all received from God, then we'll be a great church, a truly great church, a historically great church, an epically great church. And that, family, is the kind of greatness that is well worth pursuing. True greatness. Amen.